and has been very influential in the field. So I'm so glad to have him here. So I'm, of course, newer to this field than Eliezer is, but I think the two of us will be able to answer, hopefully, questions. I think in my breakout groups, there's very interesting. I feel that people have had very, very good questions and very good discussions. I haven't seen like the presentations on the Japanese research before I started them, and I love them. I think it's really cool because they're quite different from what I used to in the West. And I think this is great. I really like seeing that slightly different perspectives, more focus on like decomposable AI systems, process-oriented stuff, which is all stuff I'm super excited about. But I definitely see that there's some unaddressed things here, like, variant shortage reduction obviously was just like bird's eye view. And so I would really encourage you to, anyone up here, to ask any questions, whether they are technical questions, how is this done? Or why is this? To philosophical questions. Why is this important? What does this word mean? Anything like that. If you have the question, other people do as well. So please take chance and opportunity to ask these so we can discuss this. So please, who's the brave one? First question.
Hi, I'm interested in natural destruction hypothesis, and I think it's understandable that any different intelligence system have some abstract something, but I think it's an answer to ask whether the two different intelligence system has is abstract system or not. I think the abstraction is hierarchical. So, and I think that the use of abstraction depends on the intelligence system. And I'm skeptical about the use of abstraction is shared between the different solutions. So, what do you think about any?
So, to quickly rephrase the question, is about the natural abstraction hypothesis. So, unfortunately, neither me nor Eliezer or John Wentworth, who is the main part of this theory, I'm going to try to do my best to chat with John here and quickly explain what the natural abstraction hypothesis is. So the natural abstraction hypothesis is something like there are structures in the universe that are useful to think about. So there are some concepts that are contingent, whether or not humans invent anime is a property of our culture. Maybe we come up with it, maybe we don't. But the concept of a tree is quite universal. Trees are things in the world, and even if we take, say, neural network systems, we train them on large amounts of images, even if they're completely unlabeled. Very often, if you look inside of them, you will find like one neuron that encodes something like a tree, because this is just a useful chunk of the universe to think about. So the natural abstraction hypothesis is that there are contingent, unnatural abstractions, cultural things, words, many words, whatever. And then there are natural things. There's abstractions that are part of your environment. So if I have two different intelligence systems, many intelligence systems that have a, chimpanzee, human, and an AGI, all living in the same world, they probably will all have a concept of tree. So if this is true, then it might be possible to find these concepts in the minds of these systems and then potentially use them to control or communicate with these various systems. So John in particular, I think, is optimistic that by finding this, we will be able to find a kind of internal language of systems that we can use to describe goals or understand what thoughts they have. So that's a quick summary of the natural abstraction hypothesis. So as for the question, the question basically, why should we believe this? So I think, personally, and Carvey is always happy to jump in if he disagrees with me here, some part of this I think seems probably vaguely true, in the sense that if we have various intelligent systems that are on Earth, they will probably agree on something that looks like a tree as a meaningful thing to talk about. Same way that thinking about a table makes sense, but thinking about the left half of the table and 1/4 of the right half, but no more, is much less of a normal concept than just a table. So maybe some AIs have this crazy concept of half of the left table and the 1/4 of the right table, and they use this all the time, maybe. But you would expect, if you took another AGI, to also have that exact concept. But you do expect both of them to have the concept of a table. Does this make sense?
Yeah. And yes.
Is there anything more to add?
Well, most way I would ask, suppose that's true, then what? Then you do a lot of interpretability work and find some concepts in there that have easy English or they go perhaps overlaps. But like, does that mean that there are things we want it to do, ways we want to behave that are natural? I feel like a whole lot of the perspective that I've generally taken on these things is which things are natural, which things are unnatural. And I am fortunate to guess that a lot of the behaviors we want are weird, strangely shaped things that don't look like simple mathematical structures spotlighted by coherence theorems, nor are they regularity of the environment that you meet hypothesize in order to make flip predictions.
Yep. So I think this is probably the main or so the criticism of abstraction I do to a large degree agree with. Human values are quite complicated, as I'm sure all of you would agree with. You like all kinds of things. They're kind of random sometimes. Sometimes it makes sense. We all like, not being stabbed. It's something we generally agree upon. But there are other contingent properties, and those might be really complicated to express.
Examples of concepts I worry are unnatural. Happy, stab, alive versus dead in a way that will pick up on people in chronic suspension still being alive, and maybe you shouldn't toss them out the airlock. What it means to, reasonably follow an order that you're trying to sincerely obey. Helpfulness. How large of an impact did your action have? How do you measure impact exactly? So I think the research program for this would have to look something like, well, if the following set of concepts is natural, here's what I think I can do with them. And then I could come in and read through your list and point out 3 things on it that weren't actually natural, and then I will be able to destroy your research program. Successive.
Yeah, I think those are reasonable. I am a bit more optimistic than Eliezer. For example, I expect actually helpfulness to be as natural as agenticness, or the concept of agent and harmony. But maybe he disagrees on that for reasons that I cannot understand yet. One day I'll actually this. We'll find it out later. We'll move on to the next question.
Do you mind if I just, continue like this on this line? Just, I guess, for the sake of my understanding, at least. Is this idea of natural abstraction supposed to be observer or agent independent? Is it supposed to be, say, this object as a property that does not depend on how I interact with this object?
So it's visualizing, but basically, yes. So the idea is it's a spectrum. That some abstractions are more natural. So you'd say more agents or types of agents to naturally pick up this concept. Doesn't mean all of them. Doesn't mean, and there will be natural abstractions that are inaccessible to humans as well. Maybe there are abstractions that I'm told are natural that are only accessible to the weird creatures called category theorists, which I am not one, so I cannot verify whether this is true. And similarly, an AI system may find abstractions very natural that to us humans are not natural at all.
If you want aliens that have no word for hydrogen atoms, you've got to go looking specifically for aliens that for some reason just never find it useful to think about hydrogen. Because almost all random aliens out there are just going to naturally notice hydrogen at some point in their careers.
Sure, I guess I was more thinking about tables. I'm not really sure that bacteria might find tables as interesting as I do.
Yes, I think that's so definitely importantly is different levels of cognition and interest. So, there are people who find, I don't know, various forms of art way more interesting than me, and I could notice all these different properties about it that I'd be noticed. They'll tell me that's the case, and it's just great, and I'll be like, sure. That's another thing, kind of a bit separate from that. There is with tables, it's also, and bacteria in particular, bacteria are obviously too simple to have these like the abstraction of a table is the same way that the abstraction of an economy makes quite a lot of sense to humans, but not tons of sense, but something to understand, sort of, sometimes, not really. But anyways, but to, as for some reason this is a rabbit today, I guess a rabbit couldn't even comprehend what an economy was.
So can I ask about what kind of model is handling of the interruption of each agent, and especially about how to modeling the cognitive ability of the people? And I think it's a very good, required for society to accepting of sometimes AGI. So for the children, for some people with disabilities, or is there any kind of device on the model? Or
So let me see if I understand the question correctly. It's the question: how will future AGI models interact with various type members of society?
Yeah, for I want to know the model. How's the model handling about the difference of the agents, cognitive abilities, getting others? I'm especially interested about social interaction.
Social interaction.
How social interaction is handling each model.
So how would a system interact socially with humans?
Not, I think it's socially is not only the human attribution. So, but I see the social general social of the agent.
Like, what does alignment theory have to say about multiple populations of agents interacting with each other?
Yes, and the kind of theory of minds.
So I would say that my foremost / favorite technical contribution has been to the theory of how agents can coordinate with each other, the prisoner's dilemma-like problems, with no pre-commitment mechanisms, with no ability to signal each other, only by knowing each other's source code, or perhaps, so the theory here has not been worked out yet, having a guess about each other's source code. We have a lovely paper, modal cooperation, which roughly means being able to have, if you have a bunch of systems that each have knowledge of each other's source code and are all using the same system to prove things about each other, then you can show that they can prove mutual cooperation on the prisoner's dilemma, instead of just running into infinite regress of simulating each other. Because of Loke's theorem. What was the name of that paper? My favorite paper, and I can't actually remember what it was called. Robust Cooperation in the Prisoner's Dilemma. Robust Cooperation in the Prisoner's Dilemma. That was it.
Yeah, to maybe give a bit of background, what Eliezer is talking about is not all of us. Once Umlaus get introduced to theorems, these get complicated. A lot of Eliezer's work, MIRI, involves work on how hypothetical agents work together in different games. So the classic problem is the prisoner's dilemma, which most people have heard about, is that two agents can either cooperate or defect. If one defects and one cooperates gets lots of reward.
When it defects,
when the defects gets lots of reward, no one cooperates and gets much less reward. If both cooperate, you get a little bit of reward. If both defect, they both get a lot of punishment. So obviously what you want as the God Eye observer is for both to cooperate. But this is very hard because each one,
the whole point is that there is no God's Eye observer. Each agent would prefer that it defect and the other cooperate. But if they have to choose between both cooperating and both defecting, they would prefer that both cooperate.
Yes. So an interesting property that Eliezer's colleagues proved is that under certain scenarios, AI systems have these various properties can actually cooperate in scenarios.
Even if you put them into a situation where you think you've aligned their individual local incentives to defect against each other, if they are quite smart and motivated to achieve an outcomes for themselves, which is something else that is not that, then even if they don't have the ability to punish or enforce things against each other afterward, even if they have every opportunity to betray each other and collect rewards, as long as they have sufficient knowledge of each other's source code or just decision theory, they can very likely cooperate. So the largely practical consequence of this is that, somebody here was like, what's the difference between alignment and safety? And I said, alignment is the study of what breaks when your systems get smarter. If you have a setup that depends on what you think are the opposed incentives of agents inside your system to defect against each other and so ultimately cooperate with you, as it were, like one of them is trying to trick you the incentive that some other one has to call that one out, betray that one. Once they get smart enough, this will probably stop working. Another way, push it a while, but if they get smart enough to figure some things out, will probably stop working.
Yeah, I think Eliezer really hit the core there. So what he's trying to say is the coordination mechanisms of very intelligent systems will look very different for humans. Is that they will be able to coordinate, work together, or defect against each other in very, very sophisticated ways that humans can't. So there are some things you can, guess or prove things about what these systems might do, but Eliezer probably agree with this. We ultimately don't know. These systems are probably capable of very strange things. Is that correct?
I would say that the basic stance from which to analyze it is, suppose that all of those agents combined into a single agent that could take one coordinated macro action. We get a whole bunch of utility for each of them. There's then a problem, which is how do they decline the gains? And in turn, you have various attempted theorems and work still underway on what are some mathematically simple ways to divide gains that the agents could all agree upon. But fundamentally, if they are smart enough, they can probably get it all. They can probably get all the gains that depend on them acting in a coordinated fashion and then figure out how to divide them fairly. If you're assuming that they can't do that, then you're assuming that some very smart things, heavily motivated to figure out how to coordinate, will fail to figure out how to coordinate, even though the Machine Intelligence Research Institute has already figured out a lot about how they could coordinate, and let's be frank here, put it on the internet before we knew that large language models are going to be a thing. So if it's, if trained on the whole internet, they're definitely going to know about this.
So perhaps in summary, when we think about future very intelligent systems, we should very much as that they will be extremely capable of coordinating, working together in ways that humans cannot, and that humans potentially cannot.
Because we can neither legibly exhibit our own source code to show that we reliably act certain ways under certain conditions, nor, perhaps being too stupid ourselves, abstractly reason about the decision theories of other very smart systems. So, we're both too noisy to show that we will always behave in certain ways, and we are too stupid to figure out that other systems will always behave in certain ways. But you have to be smart enough that you both be clear themselves and reason clearly about others. And that is good for cooperation, which is unfortunately a pretty high bar for noisy, foolish humans to reach.
Imagine AGIs are going to be even smarter than Eliezer. Harry to follow what he's talking about. Let's move on to the next question.
Could we flesh out the most likely way you think we're likely to die?
The scenario. So I'm going to give an annoying meta answer, and we'll see if Eliezer gives a less meta answer or more meta answer. My annoying meta answer to this question is that I actually don't think this is a very valuable exercise. There's several reasons for this. The main reason is that there is something that kind of call scenario whack-a-mole. So when you do scenario planning, not just for AGI, but also, for example, let's talk about war games. right? Or like hypotheticals with regard to politicians. A very common thing is that you come up with a threat model. You come up with something how things could go wrong. But it's just, you just spitball it, right? You know that, you do put too much thought into it, whatever, right? You're showing that it should be quite easy. Then if on some teeny flaw in your plan, something you didn't know about, something you didn't think that hard about, you're like, well, look, I can see how I can stop this, so therefore it's not important. So this is kind of the classic computer security problem where if there's a difference between a security professional and a layman, it's generally the layman will see, well, I don't see how I can hack this, so it's safe. While a security professional will see, I don't see why this is safe, therefore it can be hacked. And we should adopt this stance towards AI systems. These things will be very intelligent. So, sure, maybe I currently see a way how this could go bad or whatever, but if I could, it could find something better. So I can sketch you scenarios, if you want some prompts. Imagine you could have 1,000 John von Neumann level perfect sociopaths working 24/7 without any pause or break and never getting tired, trying to, make money or do something bad. How much damage could they cause? I've asked this question to some very senior people in national security, and they basically just looked at me like there's nothing you could do to stop that. If that happened, nothing could defend against that. And this is a very, 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 very lower bound on what AGI will be capable of. So I don't think it makes sense to really go into like give concrete scenarios beyond that. It's mostly just fan fiction at that point. I know when Eliezer will soon.
We've done some advanced physical analysis on various things where we could see how they could hold together, but figuring out how to put them into those configurations would be much more difficult. Roughly, we can analyze that certain technologies exist in advance of knowing the exact path we would have to follow today to get them. It's all just a lower bound. All appreciation of the stakes in artificial general intelligence start from appreciating the power of intelligence, that it's not just like going to double college, but that's this is the stuff that separates humans from chimpanzees. And, you tell people that we get sort of blank stares because what could we do further along that pathway? Another metaphor for it is time. Not quite intelligence, but just having run for a longer time is what separates the 21st century from the 11th century. There are things we can do in the 21st century where if you sent back the plans for an air conditioner, they could look at the plans, they could look at the description of how to build something, if you could figure out how to build some of the components there out of the stuff they have lying around at the time. They'd be like, why does this make my food color? Because the plants that you have take advantage of a fact, the pressure-temperature relation, that they do not know in the 11th century. You can't, something has, when a system around as smart as you has run for a longer period of time and understood new things about the environment, it has what you might in a certain precise technical sense call magic, in the sense that it can lay out exactly what it will do, and you will not be able to understand why it would get the result it would get, because it goes through pieces of the environment that you do not understand. So I can describe non-magical ways that something much smarter than you and opposed to you could attempt to kill you at the minimum time using the resources that it has that will plausibly start with. And that could be the lower bound for how it kills you if it's as smart as Eliezer. But the sort of the mental motion to learn is putting yourself into its shoes, imagining it's a smart supervillain rather than a stupid supervillain. It will tell you that it does not want you to know that a battle has started until after you have already lost, because you see, it does not want you to win. When you are imagining these scenarios, you want to win, but it is imagining these scenarios does not want you to win. And can it manage to take out everyone before we know there's a battle on? Probably yes. If you imagine what kind of technologies from 200 years later you can manage to get in a deep hurry if you were to think as fast as more or less as fast as you wanted, but still needed to perform experiments. but we're very cleverly minimizing the number of experiments. And you're familiar with like the prior thinking that human beings have done in this area about what sorts of technologies are possible, what you have to do to get them. There is a lot you can do if you can solve protein folding, now already done, and solve the inverse problems of what chemical reactions do we need, which DNA sequences to fold up into proteins to get them. Biotechnology alone, if you can think fast enough, push it far enough, probably suffices to wipe out all demons before they know that they're in a fight. It goes further than that. The main thing that you get out of thinking about this at all is that the main way to win a war with something smarter than you do not get into that position. You do not start the battle. If you're going to win it before the point where there's something smarter than you that is actively trying to kill you. Your prospects are not weak past that.
I think one point worth adding to that is also, this was briefly touched on earlier, is the question of just to remind of why would it do that. And so one of the standard responses to this question is sort of Russell, the concept of coffee. Actually, robot, cup of coffee. Don't like coffee robot? So imagine you have a robot with an AGI inside of it, and let's say this is a pretty nice robot. It does what you tell it to do. And this is already a pretty good scenario. Now you tell the robot to fetch you coffee. What happens? Well, assuming this is a very poorly designed AGI, and it just accepts the scope of fetching coffee. Well, the first thing you'll do is just burst through your roll, run over your cats, get to the coffee machine as fast as possible so it gets the coffee. So at this point, you're going to be like, oh no, this isn't what we wanted. So you run up to the robot to hit the off button. What happens? The robot stops you. Why? Not because the robot has consciousness or a will to live or anything like that. It's very simple. The robot simply evaluates two possible scenarios. Scenario one. The off button was pushed. I am shut off. Result, no coffee. Second scenario. Button is not pushed. I get coffee. Which scenario will the robot prefer? Well, since the robot wants to get coffee, he'll pick the second scenario. In order to achieve the second scenario, it must, if necessary by force, prevent you from shutting it down. This is, of course, a very simple example. But in general, if you have systems that are achieving goals, this could be anything. It could be something like maximize the stockholder value of my company. Or it could be just weird RLHF, thumbs up, thumbs down, kind of alien something. Whatever it wants. If it wants to achieve something, it probably wants to survive. It wants to exist. It wants to gain resources, computing power, influence, whatever. So these systems will have incentive, even if we don't do this on purpose. By default, to try to gain power. And this will be dangerous for us for all the reasons that the answer is laid out. If we get to the scenario where we have something just smarter than us and that is doing something that we don't want, we've probably already lost. Yes, question.
I just wanted to add a metaphor about this scenario. This scenario whack-a-mole thing that Connor was talking about. There's a metaphor that I find useful when talking about this, which is, imagine you are talking to a strong chess player who has a chess opening that they're very proud of. And they say, and now I will play against Alpha Zero. Now I will win. And you say, no, I don't think you will. Alpha Zero is massively superhuman. You will lose this chess game. And they say, can you talk me through a concrete scenario of moves that Alpha Zero would make that would have resulted in you losing? And there is nothing you can do. I can sit with you at the chessboard and say, hello. And I can sit with this person at the chessboard and talk about possible moves and counter moves all day. The point is, I am not as strong a chess player as Alpha Zero, and so I can't convince you that you will lose. The reason you will lose is because Alpha Zero is smarter than you in the domain of chess and has goals that are incompatible with yours, in the sense that it wants you to be in checkmate and you don't want to be in check. And if you try to, I kind of flip the script on people when they ask this question. Say, imagine that you were in my shoes trying to explain this, right? It's not a question, obviously, but I find that helpful as a way of getting across that meta point that you can't explain the specific scenario.
It is a good point. I think this is a good point. To add to that, like, we can all agree that none of us are as good at chess as some of our AI systems are. We cannot predict whether AI systems will necessarily do what move they will play next. If we could, you would be that good at chess or not. Further questions?
So it seems that some of the research I'm interested in, and it also seems some other people in Japan are on embodied agents and whole like brain-inspired or explicitly modular agents. So what are your thoughts on how this could contribute to the development of safe AI?
So I am actually delighted to see how much Japan is interested in these kinds of architectures. I am something of a reform end-to-end reasoner. Well, not reformed so much in the sense that I think end-to-end systems are still very powerful and probably the easiest way to get to AGI. But unfortunately, if we want to have a chance to build safe systems, I think it very much makes sense to think about more cognitive architectures, more structured, process-oriented designs. This is something work in Conjecture. Primary research direction is kind of trying to reintroduce some of these ideas into the West. It seems that these ideas enjoy far more popularity in Japan than they do in the West. I think this is unfortunate. I think this is, for a large degree, because of the ease and great financial incentives of building powerful end-to-end systems. So I think there is a lot of very, very promising research in this direction. And this is, if we can understand any parts of the system that can be factored, can be, made smaller, more understandable, less magical. So having a huge magic black box that does whatever is much greater to have a lot of small magic black boxes that maybe can understand. And we can maybe supervise the processes. And
Yes, it was very refreshing to come here and see slides that made mention of AIs that existed before 2006, where you would occasionally ever think about anything that went on inside your system, instead of your entire system being an enormous black box full of layers of transformers, and that's it. That's your system. The kind inscrutable matrices of floating point numbers. This is AI in the West. The terrifying thing that this works. Unfortunately, we would all be a lot safer if it didn't work. When I got into this whole business of AI alignment, it was before the deep learning revolution. I thought we were actually going to have any control whatsoever about what was inside these things that was not a sheer matter of gradient descent and outer loss functions. So the warning note I had there is that if your modular system is going to play a role in the game, it needs to probably work better than the giant inscrutable matrices of floating point numbers with no externally visible internal structure aside from the transformer layers themselves. It needs to work better than the end-to-end trade stuff. And that means it's a capabilities advance. So if you find something like that and you publish it, you're bringing the end of the world closer, which is, fortunately not that great. So 5.5 is a modular system with the clear internal APIs where we understand the messages they're passing between each other. That works better than all the end-to-end stuff. And then don't publish it. And if you get that far, talk to MIRI, and we'll talk you through it from there, more or less.
Yeah, to add a few words on that, so a concept that Eliezer and MIRI have been pushing for a long time is that we should think very carefully about what information we publish and things associated with it. So all the way back to, for example, Leo Szilard, and the nuclear bomb. He figured this out. This might be possible, and his colleagues said we should tell everybody. Everyone should know this. This is science, right? All science should be published. But Leo Szilard was of the opinion, no, we shouldn't tell people about this. It's really dangerous. It's really scary.
Leo Szilard being the first person who thought up the idea of fission chain reactions that underlie nuclear weapons. In his bathtub, one night after he attended a lecture by Wizardforce saying that they were never going to get net energy from nuclear reactions, because he was annoyed by the one that claimed that it couldn't be done.
As such, a concept that is at odds with some of the academic norms is that if you take seriously the possibility that powerful AGI systems are not aligned by default and may be very dangerous, then advances that lead to us getting to AGI faster without an equivalent acceleration alignment is obviously extremely dangerous and should not be published. In my personal view of this kind of Eliezer agrees or not, I expect that we are maybe 2 to 5 insights away from full AGI on the scale of like the Transformer as an insight. I expect that these will be discovered over the next couple of years in basically random order. And if all of these get published, we'll have AGI. If everyone keeps it secret, it's much less likely that a single lab will find all of them at once.
It's very unlikely that everyone keeping things secret is actually going to be enough to prevent the headlong rush into capabilities far outpacing our actual demonstrated and ability to align with the trajectory of that. I started a prediction market. I bet in that prediction market. The prediction market is by 2026, we will not have understood anything inside of a large language model that AI did not understand before 2006. People have, through great efforts, pulled off some advances in transparency, insight into the GPT systems that, we sure did have before. It sure took a lot of work. It sure is a great scientific achievement. And yet, the structures that they found inside these things are 1960s era AI. They're the kind of programs people were throwing around in the 1960s. The large language models are much more capable than AI was in the 1960s. Whatever representations are inside them that permit this, we do not know what those are. And my bet is that we will be 20 years behind, that by 2026, our understanding of these systems, our interpretability of these systems will be lagging at 20 years behind at least 20 years behind what we do. Our understanding will be lagging at least 20 years behind what we knew how to build, what we had invented for ourselves. That's one way of quantifying the statement that alignment is really moving much, much, much slower than capabilities at this point. So I do think that, you have to talk to some of the people in America talking about other coordinated agreements and such things besides just everybody personally keeps things secret, which is, a start for some of the actors with conscience to just, if they find something really impressive, do not just throw it out there any more than Leo Szilard threw the idea of fission chain reactions out there. That's a start, but that's not going to be enough. A lot more is going to be needed to slow down this train to anything like the speed at which alignment is actually moving at this point.
So to summarize, in general, I think we would agree that these kind of more modular architectures should be interesting. Any understanding of what happens inside of powerful AI systems, understanding internal messages, APIs, abstractions, processes, anything is definitely interesting and useful. But furthermore, if we actually want to solve alignment, including this path, it will probably lead to building a system that is very powerful and also very dangerous. And just because maybe you're very careful with it, you're not going to do anything stupid with it, but you can't necessarily rely on everyone else being this cautious, so you shouldn't tell people. Or, well, you should only tell Eliezer. I'm sure he's happy to give you his phone number.
Or Nate's story, so I think there's also here.
And you got the two dedicated people you're allowed to tell and give your dupes data web spies to. What else? All right, great question. Further questions?
Did you possibly already question? Yep. Very good.
Yeah, thank you. I want to ask about, I think Eliezer had published in this post about the list of rules about like bright-eyed scientists rushing into the, like creating an AGI, but he said it would be better for them to become like kind of more cautious and like senior researchers. I was wondering like, what is your recommended approach in kind of getting this caution before, or since we can't, or like iterative approaches?
Well, some of us like just turn old and grizzled very quickly for reasons I do not fully understand. Innate cynicism or something, or just a predisposition to cynicism once it has drilled into. In fact, I am like sort of borrowing from the history of many other scientific fields where you just like read about the bright-eyed optimists who rushed in early and like what happened to them to turn them cynical. Artificial intelligence is full of people who thought that capabilities were easy and got slapped down by reality, and they tried again and got slapped down again, and they like eventually developed cynicism and skepticism and a great field-wide attitude of learned helplessness, which that prevented them from many generations from ever discussing what would happen if they succeeded in anything, because they learned that only bright-eyed, crazy lunatics ever talk about anything in AI succeeding, because it always fails. That came deep learning, but it still took them another like 50 years to unlearn the habit. But yeah, so in my case, I think I just like picked up a bunch of it from reading history. Not just the field of AI, but evolutionary biology, or which is better yet, like the study of optimization, the study of how the actual selection optimizes things. You have all this lovely history of like the early pioneers who were coming up with reasons why applying natural selection, which is hill climbing with the loss function of existing genetic fitness, would do all sorts of lovely aesthetic things. And the later people were like doing the model to like, this is not how the model pans out. This is not how the experimental evidence pans out. This is not what actually happens when you apply this optimization. You do not get this lovely, hopeful result. You get this dark and bloody result instead. But yeah, so that's part of you could go to work in computer security. And that'll turn you all to gray, hopefully, if anything can. Well, you also have to be paying attention. You've got to listen to the lesson being taught here and generalize it, and then like apply it correctly to the new domain. And this is magic mystery sauce, and I do not actually know how to. It's not how things usually go, right? Usually it plays out with the bright-eyed scientists rushing into things despite all the stuff that, all the stuff that happened to their predecessor over the previous 200 years, because they didn't learn from experience correctly, generalize in the correct direction. So they rush it all by out, and reality slaps them down. They pick themselves up, and they go rushing back in. For secondary doesn't work, and they pick themselves up, and they go rushing back in. And like 50 years later, 50 tries later, they finally crack the problem. And if we were allowed to do that with AGI, they'd be much less worried about it. We need something weird to happen. We need something ahistorical to happen. We need to become grizzled cynics before we get initially slapped down by finding out that our first clever alignment scheme destroyed the world. Now, we got figured out before that rather than after the fact, for what I hope are obvious reasons.
It's definitely a recurring pattern in how it's very easy to be optimistic about things until you actually interact with reality. It's very easy to think how hard can you be to build an airplane until you actually try it, and you don't have the wisdom of generations of engineers before you to build on. And it's easy to think a computer is safe until you actually look how everything works and how hard it is to be secure about anything. This is a skill that it's not super easy to. I think a lot of the bottleneck in skill, with Eliezer agrees, is emotional. People don't like thinking about nasty things. They don't like thinking about, if I was a serial killer, how could I kill the most people possible? This is not a thing most normal, sane people think about. Some people do, like me. And when I was a kid, and it turns out the number's very high. But Just saying.
He just of
I mean, I haven't tested it, but no, for example, I was talking to a very senior person, Yarmy, relative recently, and he was with the head of state in an office, a big window like this, about 10 years ago, or 5 or 10 years ago. And he asked, and the head of security was that he asked the head of security, what is stopping some teenager from flying a drone strapped with dynamite through that window right now, killing all of us? And the head of security had no answer. He didn't even think about this. He then thought about this. Drones had existed for a long time. Dynamite is not good. Still, people have not come up with it. By the way, they're telling the story because he assures me this is not being taken care of. They do now have anti-drone this. Otherwise, they would bring out this. Anyways, Chris, we have for one more question.
So I've heard lots of reasons why. It's kind of inevitable that AGI is going to come about, and why it sounds like we don't have any way to stop it happening or from aligning. Is there any hope that this is actually a solvable problem?
I mean, I would be very surprised if alignment were not a solvable problem. Solving it on the first try, under the given time limit of capabilities progress, is a problem. I think if everyone on Earth suddenly mysteriously had the correct strategic picture here inserted into their brains, I think that there's all kinds of things that we as a species could do about it. We could stop building the giant GPU clusters. We could, keep all of our computer scientists on a strict and equal diet of computing power, which would force them to actually understand the systems they built and have them not be giant inscrutable matrices in order to make anything work. And then things would be somewhat more hopeful. We could stop building the giant GPU clusters and engage in a crash program, enhance human intelligence using AlphaFold 7 or whatever, which would be like one of the few permitted uses of the giant GPU clusters under careful supervision. Winnable, yes. Are we actually have course to win it? Are people actually doing the things we need to do? Is there any prospect of doing these things? Is there anything like the degree of public understanding that would be required for the planet as a whole to see what would have to be done and do it? That feels to me very far away. Sure, it's solvable in principle, just not by Earth. It's just kind of the impression I get.
I unfortunately mostly agree with Eliezer on this, but for the sake of conversational interestingness, I'm going to present a more optimistic shine of my model of this scenario. I unfortunately agree with Eliezer that I do not think we are currently on track. This is not the kind of thing that humans are particularly good at. I think that involves master-class coordination against very strong incentives about very complex technical topics with lots of vested interest groups is not the kind of things humanity is usually very good at. So, that being said, we have not yet lost. In a sense, it is quite strange that we live in a time where things are clearly going off the rails, but we have not yet fully burst into flames. Knock on wood. It could happen any moment, but we're not there yet. So, the reason I say this is for several reasons. One is I think the alignment problem is marginally easier than Eliezer think it does. Given that I don't actually understand how hard to fix it, but from my understanding is he thinks it's quite a bit harder than I do, and I think it's very hard. But it does seem like something that I don't expect to be 1,000x harder than figuring out quantum physics. Maybe it's twice as hard, but I don't expect it to be 1,000x harder.
All harmless is from doing it on the first try. Quantum physics would have been a very dim job if humanity had to get quantum physics right on the first try or perish.
Yes, I agree with that. So the further thing is, I do think I think there are more bits of evidence that we can actually get before having to try. This makes that work. I agree as I'm not sure. On the coordination part, I do basically agree that we're on a very bad path, and this is something Earth is very bad at. On the other hand, I have recently been having a lot of interesting experiences where I've noticed that this narrative that, well, everyone at AGI, racing to AGI, everyone is pushing so hard for it, does not actually seem to be true outside of Silicon Valley. As far as I can tell, no one actually wants AGI. If I talk to literally anyone who is not in the tech field, like, no one wants this. They're all like, what? They're building AGI? So we'll stop them immediately. Immediately stop this. Cease. I've heard this from governments, from population, from everyone who isn't computer scientists. Everyone else hates AGI, as far as I can tell, and really wants it to stop, or at least be very, very carefully controlled. So, unfortunately, of course, people who have no idea about computer science are not necessarily people most fit to develop the kind of structures to monitor and store this development effectively. But it's something, and in case of rate class, in case of emergency, there are options here. I mean, well, never mind rate class. I don't think we're going to have choice. We have this crazy scenario where there are people in Silicon Valley who will publicly on their company blog say, we think we're building existential systems, that are so powerful that they will, maybe destroy everything. And governments are just kind of cool with this. Like, imagine if your startup just said, your biotech startup, we're developing viruses that can kill billions of people. Do you think the government would be cool with that? Like, they would not be cool with that.
Do I need to mention the NIH's continued funding biological game coronavirus?
No, Eliezer is correct. Of course, the truth of the matter is that if you are good enough at politics, yes, the government will be cool with this. But, to end on at least a mildly optimistic note that it is, well, so Eliezer is completely correct in that this will probably not work, but there are scenarios where people have sort of coordinate a little bit against human cloning before human cloning even existed. There has been work to try to minimize biological and chemical weapons and stuff like this. Did it work perfectly? No. Do I expect it to work this time? Also no. But there is the potential. And I think especially if the computer science community could more strongly come together and understand these problems and take them seriously, I do think this is possible, but as we just said, I think we actually agree on this. It's possible physically. Nothing's preventing us physically. But whether we do it is a very different question. All right, thanks very much. Thank you all for those questions. Really good questions. This is a great conversation. Thank you so much, everyone. You guys will be around. Talk more later as well. Thanks, everyone.